Hello, this training is recognizing, preventing, and reporting child abuse and neglect. While it may be a more brief training, it is still comprehensive so that at the end of it, you will feel more confident in being able to recognize potential signs of abuse, how to prevent future abuse, and if necessary, how to report abuse and neglect. This is a recording, so you can pause it or rewind if you need to further explore a slide or re-listen to what's being said so that you can best understand this at the end of the training. Community Action Council takes this topic very seriously, and we want to make sure that all of our kids stay safe, all of our staff stay safe, families stay safe, and you as a contractor, volunteer, therapist, etc. also stay safe. We will need to start off by explaining that every child has the right to these next few things, which is dictated by Kentucky law. Every child has the right to adequate food, clothing, and shelter. They have the right to be free from physical, sexual, or emotional injury or exploitation. They have the right to develop physically, mentally, and emotionally to their potential. And they also have the right to educational instruction and a secure, stable family. When we look at the definition of child abuse, there is a legislation that is called CAPTA, the Child Abuse Prevention Treatment Act. And this is how the official definition reads. Any recent act or failure to act on the part of the parent or caretaker, which results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse or exploitation, or an act or failure to act which presents imminent risks of serious harm. And it goes on to explain that abuse can be categorized in these next few categories: physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. We want to make sure that we show you some of the statistics. Now this is from 2023. This is reporting that is done biannually. So this is the most recent information that we have as of 2025. But if you look here on the left, this is the national statistics, and here on the right is Kentucky statistics. You can see that in Kentucky, 51% of reported abuse or neglect is classified as neglect, while the national is 64%. So while Kentucky may be below the national average for neglect, it still represents a little more than half of the reported cases in our state. And then it goes on to explain the further breakdowns of each type of abuse that's been reported. The first category we're going to talk about is neglect. Neglect occurs when a parent or caregiver fails to provide essential needs, such as food, clothing, shelter, medical care, or supervision, to the extent that the child's health, safety, or well-being is put at risk. I want you to pay special attention to the words in bold, because those are very important when determining if neglect is present. Neglect can be unintentional, it can be intentional. Regardless of the intentions, neglect is neglect. It is still the same result. You might notice some physical indicators of kids that might be experiencing neglect, such as inappropriate dress for the weather, such as wearing shorts in the wintertime when it's snowy outside, or wearing the same old clothes or too small of clothes to the classroom every day. Now, this is not to be confused with the occasional childhood tantrum where they want to wear a tutu and flip-flops when it's 45 degrees outside. This is regarding a consistent pattern of inappropriate dress for the weather. Some other indicators might be they're chronically dirty or unbathed, coming in with soiled diapers, even though you let them go home in unsoiled clothes, they come back the next morning in those same clothes that are now soiled. They might be malnourished, and they might have severe diaper rash or other persistent skin disorders or rashes resulting from improper care or lack of hygiene. And I want to make a note that this is not an exclusive list. There can be other indicators. These are some of the more common ones that you might see. It may not always be incredibly obvious to the eye, but there will be behavioral indicators as well. A child who's experiencing neglect might demonstrate some severe lack of attachment to other adults. This in combination with having a flat affect, which basically means that they just show no emotion, it can demonstrate that there's been some severe neglect going on. They might have poor social skills, which needs to be separated from any clinical diagnosable disorder or any cultural trait. They might steal food. They might be very demanding of affection or attention, or they might just have no understanding of basic hygiene, even though they would be old enough to know something like that. We always like to show this slide too before we move on, because it's important to know that abuse and neglect, it's not only physical, but it's also psychological, physiological changes within the brain of a child. If you look here in the top left corner, this brain right here that the laser pointer is circling is a healthy brain. This healthy brain has lots of activity noted by the red, green, and yellow, and signals that this brain is operating normally and developing normally. However, the brain scanned to the right, this is a different brain. This brain experienced a lot of abuse. You can notice that there's much less activity, much less colors, all throughout the brain in all the regions. And so this shows that there's a significant lack of brain activity, lack of appropriate development within the brain structure. And if you look here to the bottom right, not only is it brain activity and psychological changes that can happen as a result of prolonged exposure to trauma, but there's also pretty visible physical responses, such as this normal sized brain of a 3-year-old who was not abused or neglected and had a safe and secure development. This brain, however, experienced extreme neglect. And you can notice the size difference. The brain shrunk, or it did not grow to the size that it needed to be. So this child will experience, unfortunately, delays and will have a greater risk of chronic disease and mental health problems in childhood that will follow this kid into adulthood. And when these brain activities or brain sizes are impacted because of abuse or neglect, a child can really struggle to learn how to regulate emotions, especially when they're living in a state of constant stress. There's a stat that's important to me and important to the Head Start community, and it's that before the age of 5, 90% of a child's brain is developed. So within those first 5 years of life, 90% of a kid's brain is growing, developing, shaping the way the kid is growing up and is acting. So it's very important, and I hope that you, as you are listening to this training, understand the importance of the early childhood years and the importance that Head Start plays in providing safe and secure classrooms so that a kid can experience healthy brain development. This next category that we're going to cover is physical abuse. This is one that people are typically most comfortable in recognizing and being able to explain or point out. But this occurs when a caretaker allows or causes physical harm to a child by non-accidental means. So this is not referring to you hitting a child's head on the wall while you're spinning around playing with them. This refers to you purposefully hitting that kid's head on the wall, but playing it off as you were just spinning with them. Additionally, caretakers who create or allow a situation that put the kid at risk of physical injury by non-accidental means, again, intention is important here, that is considered abuse as well. When this abuse is being described or reported, you may hear the term serious physical injury. That is an adjective or description of the injury that resulted, whether it was accidental or non-accidental. But when someone says serious physical injury, that usually means that the kid was put at a substantial risk of death or did die, significant and lasting disfigurement, long-term health issues, long-term loss or impairment of bodily function, including being paralyzed. When it comes to physical indicators, most people would understand that bruising and broken bones and burns are some of the most obvious indicators of physical abuse. If there's an injury that doesn't match the given explanation or the story that explains the injury is just fishy sounding, that might be a physical indicator. We'll talk about the 10-4 rule here in the next minute or two, but again, that refers to the location of bruising. And shaken baby syndrome is also classified under physical abuse. There are some risk factors that a kid can have. Risk factors mean that they would be at a higher risk of physical abuse if these things are present in their life. Some of the bigger ones would be a history of being abused or neglected as a child, physical or mental illnesses such as depression or post-traumatic stress disorder, whether it is experienced by the kid or by the caretaker. If there's financial stress or unemployment in the family, if there's substance abuse, if there's poor understanding of child development and immature parenting skills, those are all risk factors that heighten the possibility of physical abuse. You notice here, this is a nice little graphic that explains the 10-4 bruising rule. And we all know, or if you don't know, kids can get bruises everywhere, from playing, rough, tumbling, jumping up and down, tripping. They can get bruises. So it's not uncommon for kids to have bruises. However, there are specific areas where you need to pay attention to. And this is where the 10-4 rule comes in. And you'll notice that it stands for torso, ears, neck. So if you see bruising on a kid's torso, on a kid's ears, or a kid's neck, and they're under the age of 4, that is most likely a sign of physical abuse. And then the rule is if a baby is less than 4 months old, any bruising anywhere, that kid is not moving around, therefore should not be accidentally getting bruising by tripping or running into something. So 10-4 is a very easy way to remember when to take notice of specific bruising. I'm about to show some pictures of suspicious bruising, and I want to make sure that I warned you in case this might be something that upsets you or might frighten you, and you may not want to watch this slide and close your eyes. But here you notice some suspicious bruising. So again, if we're talking about 10-4, you can notice here on the ears, you can see this bruising, or at least I hope you can on your computer. This kid has bruising on the back of their ears. You see this kid has bruising on their ears as well. And it's important to notice because they may look small, but they're important. There's no reason a kid should be getting bruises on their ears without a significant explanation. Here a kid has bruises and scratches on her neck. Again, remembering the 10-4 rule. And here the kid has red marks, and if you look very carefully, you can kind of see a handprint on their butt and on their back, and it can spread around to the front. So these are all examples of what suspicious bruising might look like. I want to take a minute to explain the distinction between bruising or Mongolian spots. Mongolian spots, scientific name that a doctor might say, would be congenital dermal melanocytosis. But that can be a mouthful, so a lot of people just refer to them as Mongolian spots. And this is primarily seen in babies of Asian, Native American, African American, or Hispanic descent. They're typically found, if you notice on the pictures, at the top of the butt, between the shoulder blades, or they might be pretty extensive and cover a lot of the body. It's important to know that a Mongolian spot is just a type of birthmark and will likely resolve itself or fade away as the kid grows older into toddlerhood. It can be real easy to mistake these for bruises, especially if you're not aware of what Mongolian spots are. But the distinction between the two is that bruising changes colors and shapes, and when you touch a bruise, it hurts. A kid's going to express some physical discomfort with you touching their bruises. However, these Mongolian spots, they're consistent and they don't hurt to touch. And that is a very easy way to tell the difference between the two, but it requires you taking notice and tracking any observations you might have. This next category we're going to cover is sexual abuse. And while it is the most difficult typically to cover, train on, engage with, read cases of, it's important to know the definition and how to recognize it. But it's classified as any contact or interaction where the caretaker uses, allows, permits, or encourages the use of a kid for sexual stimulation for the perpetrator or another person. Some physical indicators that might signal sexual abuse is happening is the kid has an STI. They might have blood in their underwear. All of a sudden they have trouble walking or sitting or complaining of genital pain. You might notice when you change their diapers or take them to the potty that they have an injury to the penis, scrotum, or even have vaginal or anal tears. So all of these things can very seriously point to indicators of sexual abuse. There may not always be physical indicators, so it's important to recognize behavioral ones as well. An important one that I want to point out is having new words for private body parts. I worked with a kid once who was experiencing this, and he referred to his penis as a Twinkie. And when he told his mom that his uncle always took his Twinkie, his mom thought nothing of it. Come to find out that that's the term that the kid used for his penis and that there was sexual abuse happening. So while it might be uncomfortable for us to have that conversation or say those words around kids, it is important to understand, for them to understand that there are specific words for their private body parts and for us to say those body parts. They might resist removing clothes when it's appropriate, like for bath or bedtime or diapering, and that might be more signified by a fear response. They might mimic adult-like sexual behaviors with toys or stuffed animals. They have a sudden change in eating habits. They have inappropriate sexual behaviors or knowledge that's not lining up with their age or their experiences. And they might develop new or unusual fears of certain people or places. We want to take a minute here and talk about keeping kids safe, because it's important to know what to look for the different types of abuse, but it's also important to know the warning signs of what an abuser might look like. The DOJ consistently lets out reports that average out to be around 93% of perpetrators of sexual abuse are known to the child and the family. And so when we're educating kids about appropriate boundaries and where it's safe to touch and who can touch you, that is the first line of defense against sexual abuse. And so knowing the warning signs of potential abuser combined with the prevention actions of education for kids, those combined are critical to protecting kids from this type of abuse. So what an abuser might look like in an adult is when an adult befriends a child with the intention of building an emotional connection that lowers the kid's inhibitions and use of safe boundaries. This is what we call grooming. This behavior can include gaining the trust of parents, teachers, caretakers, other adults involved in the kid's life, all for the explicit purpose to gain access to the child alone. Being aware of the warning signs can help keep your kids safe. And so the warning signs that you really should pay attention to are when the adult is insisting on physical contact with a child, hugging, touching, tickling, kissing, even if the child resists. This is not necessarily referring to grandma coming over and wanting a kiss and the kid running away. That's not necessarily what this refers to. But if an adult is insistent on hugging, grabbing the kid, pulling them in, tickling them even though the kid's screaming stop, that's a warning sign. If an adult focuses intently on a particular child and gives them gifts or monies, or they share secrets with them, those are very big red flags. When they frequently plan outings alone with a child, or often offer to babysit different children at different times. And the key to remember in this bullet point is that they are trying to be intentional and being alone with the child. But if you remember that 93% of perpetrators are known to the child in the family, that may not be an outlandish request for them to be alone with the kid. So it's always important to take all the knowledge that you can have to keep kids safe. And another couple red flags is that an adult might make sexual comments in the presence of or about a child. These are the ones that might give you the ick, that just kind of raise your eyebrows and like, why would you even say that? And they might not respect the privacy of kids, or they downplay the use of healthy boundaries. Again, trying to lower the inhibitions of that kid. So what happens when we get to the point to where we feel like we need to report suspected child abuse? Everyone, regardless of your status, has an ethical, legal, and moral obligation to support our kids when it comes to this. In Kentucky, any person who has reason to believe that a child is neglected or abused shall immediately report their suspicions. And Kentucky law was revised a while ago to clarify that the following forms of child abuse are also required to be reported, and that will now include abuse or neglect by a person in any position of authority or special trust, or anytime a person 21 years or older commits or allows an act of sexual abuse or exploitation or prostitution upon a child less than 16. So anyone who has suspicions of these things are responsible for reporting under Kentucky law. There are several ways to make reports. You can always call the abuse hotline, which is you can see here on the screen. You can contact the CHFS or DCBS. You can contact the Kentucky Child and Adult Protective Services. They have an online reporting system that you can utilize. You can go to Kentucky State Police or just your local police department, or go to an attorney or county attorney, and all of these people can assist you in furthering up the chain where the report needs to go to. Most often when you make the report, they're going to want this type of information. This doesn't mean that you have to have every single piece of this information, but this is going to be what they request in order to get the most clear picture of what's going on. They're going to want to know things like the kid's name, gender, maybe how old they are, the name of the person that you are believing to be responsible for the abuse or neglect, description of the injury, where the kid is, are they safe currently, and they will likely want to know your name and your contact information to report back to you and get follow-up if needed. Of course, you can make anonymous reports too, but that makes it more difficult if the investigator needs to follow up on a lead or get more information from you. So what happens if you're not sure? What if you're not sure that you need to make a report, or you're not confident that the abuse is something that needs to be escalated? This is where the term reasonable suspicion becomes important. Reasonable suspicion means that it's objectively reasonable for someone, based on their observed facts or their own training and experience, to suspect abuse or neglect. Reasonable suspicion does not require certainty or 100% confidence that it's happening, or to the knowledge of a specific medical indication that a child abuse has occurred. Any reasonable basis for concern is enough to make a report. I always like to add a caveat to this point that documentation is incredibly important when it comes to these things. Any reasonable basis for concern is enough to make a report, just like we talked about. And that means that over time, if there's enough reports, that can create another level of suspicion and for reason for investigation into the matter. And mandated reporters, which under Kentucky law, we are as Head Start teachers and contractors and volunteers within child development centers. Mandated reporters may ask clarifying questions as part of determining reasonable suspicion. For suspected sexual abuse, you might consider these following questions. Is there a pattern of behaviors that do not have a plausible explanation? Does the kid have sexualized behavior or knowledge that's not age appropriate? And do you suspect that there's inappropriate behavior or an inappropriate relationship between a child and an adult? And if you doubt, you may call CHFS and make a hypothetical report. Tell them your suspicions and they will let you know if a report needs to be made. Even though we may be mandated reporters, we need to remember that we are not supposed to investigate these things. So do not ask leading questions like, did your daddy do this to you? Where else did he touch you? Did anyone tell you to keep this a secret? Kids are especially impressionable, and if you ask these questions that lead them into answers that may not be 100% accurate, it can be really devastating and actually distract from the real abuse or neglect that may be occurring. So while you may not investigate, you may clarify to determine if abuse has occurred. And these really revolve around open-ended questions. Tell me about your drawing. Tell me about these bruises. Tell me what happened. Can you explain this a little bit more? Questions like those allow the kid to give their own answer and can lead you to make a better decision if it needs to be reported or not. Anyone acting upon reasonable cause in making a report of child abuse or acting in good faith when they do so shall have immunity from any liability, civil, or criminal penalties that might otherwise be incurred or imposed on them. And any such participant in report making shall have the same immunity with respect to any judicial proceeding resulting from such report or action. That's straight from Kentucky law, and what that means is if you make a report with reasonable cause and you're making it in good faith, and that report turns out to be not true and there is no abuse happening, you are immune and protected from any lawsuits or fees or legal consequences from making a report that turned out to not have any substance to it. However, there are some caveats that we need to address, and if you fail to report child abuse, that's a Class B misdemeanor and can result in jail time and some heavy fines, especially if it happens again and again. And if you purposely make a false report, so this would not be acting in good faith. If you purposely make a false report, it's a Class A misdemeanor, and you get more jail time and more fines added to your case to pay. And here at Community Action, we ensure the safety of all kids by many different measures. The most important ones is that we implement the following procedures in all of our classrooms. We do morning health checks. We get regular and annual training on child abuse reporting and how to do so. And we also make sure that we have adequate supervision of children. And all of these things can be found in our program operation procedures, whether it be online or in print copy. Ask for them and they can be provided to you. Head Start safety procedures in a little bit more detail that we just talked about, that morning health check. Its whole goal is to make sure that there's ongoing evaluation to identify health or developmental concerns in a timely fashion. So if there is something that needs to be addressed, that it's not waiting a week or two, that it's noticed that morning and can be addressed in that timely fashion. We want to make sure there's adequate supervision because that just means we got eyes on the kids at all times. And that's important to prevent abuse or injuries. And we make sure that our staff and contractors and volunteers, etc., understand the importance and how to do child abuse reporting, because we want to make sure that any suspected case of abuse or neglect should be reported, and that's for the safety of the kid and the wellness of the family. And again, who is responsible for reporting suspected child abuse at CAC? And if you are a staff, contractor, volunteer, for CAC, you are now determined to be a mandated reporter, which means you are responsible for reporting any abuse you might suspect. And if a staff person suspects abuse or neglect of a child or receives a report from a parent, they need to complete a report of suspected child abuse form, which can be provided to them by their supervisor or some of the Office of Child Development directors. And what if you are alleged of child abuse? And this is unfortunately happening in today's world. But if you are alleged of child abuse in one of our centers or period, you are removed from direct contact with kids in your care immediately, and you are to remain out of all of our child development centers until you are cleared by the cabinet. During this time, our executive director, Head Start director, health director, and HR director, they will collect supporting documentation that includes different things such as written statements from people involved, notifying our policy council on board, reviewing camera footage, providing staff support, all to make sure that things continue to operate safely while you are being cleared or investigated. If it's a staff member that's involved, all parents from our current program year are notified via the Child Plus alert system, and all staff will be notified via email. Individual contacts will be made immediately with the involved families of that kid and those who are enrolled at the location where that staff person has been removed from. All these records of suspected child abuse that happen within our centers are maintained and locked away in a file cabinet at our administrative office. And that has restricted access, and so not anybody can just go in and retrieve those files. And once all documents are collected, records are then sent to the HR department for filing and appropriate monitoring. And when we say that we monitor child abuse and neglect, this includes the things that we've talked about. We do regular monitoring through morning health checks, weekly risk prevention checklists, and health and safety classroom observations. These are regular things that happen that we do here at Community Action Council to ensure the safety of all of our kids. And as we wrap up on this final slide, I want to remind you that safety starts with awareness and preparedness. That means that you understand and are able to implement the things that you've learned in this training, that you are able to recognize potential signs of child abuse and neglect, and what to do if you think that you've noticed child abuse or neglect in our centers or outside of our centers for that matter. Make sure that you review safety plans and policies and procedures that are applicable to you. And make sure to ask questions while you're with us. Grab a staff member, call the administrative office, get a hold of your CAC contact, and make sure that they understand your question, because we want to make sure that you remain safe, that our kids remain safe, and that our centers remain a safe place for everyone to come to.